once a month for 14 years. I was part of a small group that Juliet hosted at her house. Juliet taught us the art of poetry and craft and theory. I still think of her as my mentor, but we stopped meeting in 2018. She told me it was time to strike out on my own. At the dawn of the new millennium, there was also a time of difficulty in my family. That difficulty I mentioned at the beginning of remarks. That time that led to me realizing I am a writer. We were gathered as a family, and I looked over at Karen. We weren't married yet. And I found myself captivated by the way her face had been transformed in sadness and concern. How it made me feel, yes, but also the image of her face. Then her hands, twisting and untwisting the tassels on an ivory Chanel throw. What it communicated about that moment, yes, but also the image. Hands working the tassels into tightness, then loosening them again. I knew at the time that image would appear in a poem that I would write. And it did. I wanted only to be present with my family in that moment. To think about our loss and take care of each other. Be present in my emotions, aware of them, subservient to them. And I was. I was also gathering images. Here, I must speak about the Natasha Trethewey poem Elegy, which begins her masterful collection, Thrall. Elegy by Natasha Trethewey for my father. I think by now the river must be thick with salmon. Late August, I imagine it as it was that morning, drizzle needling the surface, mist at the banks, a net settling around us. Everything damp and shining. That moment, awkward and heavy in our hip waders, we stalked into the current and found our places. You, upstream a few yards, and out far deeper. You must remember how the river seeped in over your boots and you grew heavier with that defeat. All day I kept turning to watch you. How first you mimed our guides casting, then cast your invisible line, slicing the sky between us. And later, rod in hand, how you tried again and again to find that perfect arc, flanked of an insect skimming the river's surface. Perhaps you recall I cast my line and reeled in 2 small trout we could not keep. Because I had to release them, I confess I had thought about the past, working the hooks loose, the fish writhing in my hands, each one slipping away before I could let go. I can tell you now that I tried to take it all in, record it for an elegy I'd write one day when the time came. Your daughter was that ruthless. What does it matter if I tell you I learned to be? He kept casting the line, and when it did not come back empty, it was tangled with mine. Some nights, dreaming, I step again into the small boat that carried us out and watched the bank receding. I back to where I know we are headed. Few poems mean more to me as a person who identifies as a writer than Trethewey's elegy. Sometimes I see a kind of helplessness in the identity of the writer. Noticing the recording, the effort to find the entry point, the work of ink across the page, the things we add, the things we strike out, the effort to send our creations out into the world, the difficulty in that, persistence it requires, the vanity, the nerve. And sometimes I only see myself. I wanted to be present in my emotions, aware of them, subservient to them. And I was. Accept what comes from silence, Wendell Berry advises in his famous poem, How to Be a Poet. It's a poem in 3 sections, and it has an epigraph at the beginning, a phrase in parentheses. It reads, to remind myself. Here's the 3rd stanza, which is also section 3 of the poem. Accept what comes from silence. Make the best you can of it. Of the little words that come out of the silence, like prayers prayed back to the one who prays. Make a poem that does not disturb the silence from which it came. I was appalled by my image gathering, by what felt like opportunism within a time of family difficulty. Thought about it for days. Then finally realized, can't help it. Can't help it. I am a writer. Wish I could say from that moment on, I identified as a writer or a poet. That isn't how it happened. If I was at a cocktail party, not that I would go to something like that, but if I was, or a gathering of some kind, and someone introduced me as their friend Michael, the poet, I felt this need to debate the point. And sometimes I did. Poet was overstating it in my mind. At first, because I hadn't published anything. Then, once I did, because I hadn't published enough things or hadn't published in the right places. Then, once I had, I couldn't be a poet because I don't have an MFA. And because I would always lack that, I eventually arrived at the realization that lots of poets and novelists and essayists and playwrights don't have an MFA. Then, looking for some other reason not to identify as a poet, I was just about to start thinking that I can't be a poet because I don't have a book. When I thought about Lavinia, Emily's sister, Emily Dickinson, and Lavinia finding Emily's letters and poems after Emily had died, unpublished up to that point. No book, no MFA, no one walking around calling her a poet, not calling herself a poet, or no ability to debate the point when other people did. Just a big pile of art born of instinct and desire. No truer writer ever lived or will. No truer poet. I like to think that we're all true writers in our way, as true as any other. Perhaps you don't gather images during times of difficulty like I do, but the instinct and desire expresses itself in some way through you and in you. And the identity as writer is rooted there. You have a desire to create with words that is rooted in something that exists within you, like curiosity or need or love. I don't like to give advice. I feel like the keynote structure is one that lends itself to advice giving. I'm not standing at a podium right now, I'm sitting in a chair, but if I were at a podium, that whole thing would kind of lend into it as well. And I'm standing on a stage of some kind, a little bit higher than everyone else in the room. And I've asked for people's attention because I've got something compelling to say. I don't like to give advice. And to the extent that I've shared anything here, it's things that I've learned after years of not knowing them. I mean them to be the story of my travels and not the story of travel. Other people will have different travels and different things that they learn as a result of those travels. But I do have a few things I'd like to pass along before I go. I call them ideas and not rules. First, there's this. Love yourself as yourself. For who you are and what you love and how desire assigns you passions and callings. Second, trust your instincts as much as you can. I know it's hard sometimes. I can feel someone out there thinking perhaps that their instincts have misguided them on one occasion or two or more. I hear that, feel that too. But if your instincts keep calling you to the same place, that place is likely home for you. Paint the walls, decorate, make it yours. Third, be influenced by the things you read. I had a little bit of time to hear the panel that was just before this one, and I wanted to share that most writers I know read a lot. I don't know another way to do it. Reading keeps us inspired. In reading, we find our influences. In reading, sometimes we find a voice or how our voice can exist within the art we kind of want to make. There can be within that this temptation to follow the prevailing mode. If the world of novelists is zagging, it can be hard to zig. But I think we're meant to make the art we're meant to make and to write in a voice that is ours. And I believe that authenticity wins out over everything else, and that we're best off if we just are our authentic selves in the work that we make. Last, No one can tell you who you are or what you do. No external forces can make you a writer if you are not. And no external forces can take away from you an identity that you inhabit in your being. So don't let them. Don't let any writer, teacher, publisher, editor, agent, or other person tell you what you are and what you are not. Don't look to external factors for permission to claim an identity that you already live. If you like writing poems, you are a poet. You like writing novels, you are a novelist. You like writing creative nonfiction, you are a creative nonfiction writer. If you like writing plays, you're a mystery to me, but you're also a playwright. These are not subjective matters. There is no qualitative or quantitative hurdle you must clear in order to claim your identity. If you like being a writer, you are a writer. Claim it. Claim it for yourself. Then do it. Do the thing you love. Right. I think about a Maya Angelou quote I encounter from time to time. There is no greater agony, she said, than bearing an untold story inside you. Do that. Do the thing you love. Call yourself that thing to the world or not. Concern for what other people think of you has the potential to take you away from yourself. Don't let them. See yourself in what you love doing and do the things you love. Writing. Then write, dear writer. Write whenever you feel like it. And if you do, you'll find your voice in art. Thank you.
So we have some questions. Can you see them, Michael, in the Q&A area?
Oh, yeah. So I'll answer the first one first. I've been an instructor with the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop for about 6 years now. We've had a little bit of time away from the classrooms. We have 3 classes that are underway within correctional facilities this semester, but for the past 18 months, we haven't been able to teach in person, and we've been doing whatever instruction we can by video, and it's different. It's not the same as being in a classroom together sharing ideas, but it's really helpful. I've learned a lot and grown a lot and shared a lot and thought about a lot of writing concepts and concepts for community in those spaces. I've met some of the best writers in Minnesota who happen to be our students, and benefit a lot by reading things together and sharing ideas together. I walked in hoping to enjoy becoming a teacher, and found a calling, something that I love doing, something that I feel fortunate that I get an opportunity to do. I think many of us are looking for ways to serve and be helpful, and that this one was available to me when it was has meant a lot to me. It's work that I enjoy. It's challenging. It feeds my spirit. keeps me engaged with thinking of how we can approach a topic or an idea. And it also calls me into community with some people who are making amazing things and who are themselves amazing people. And I really love that too. Would I ever consider writing a memoir or a book about the process of identity? As a writer or poet, I could see this being important in creative writing programs for people just starting out, often driven only by their desire and indications. Would I ever consider it? Sure. Or maybe an essay that would be part of an anthology where other people could share ideas as well. It's something I think about a lot. As I implied in the speech, I didn't claim the identity for many, many years. I don't know that it really hurt me in any particular way. I wonder sometimes if I would have done some things faster. If I'd embraced it earlier, I was going to be writing anyway. I was still going to do that. I mean, whether I called it a particular thing or allowed other people to call it a particular thing became kind of less important to me. But I do think that behind all that, there was some reason for the struggle. I meet people all the time who write one poem and say, I'm a poet. And from time to time, I'm like, how did you do that? And I think it's worldview. I think it's perspective. I think part of it for me is a matter of race and growing up Black in a country that can be anti-Black and not always seeing a place for me in the world of arts or a practical pathway that would allow me to make a living as an artist. I grew up in a home with a lot of guidance around here's what you do when you go to college. Here are the things you should major in. Get yourself a good job. Don't struggle. Set your children up so they can avoid struggle. Those types of things. And art wasn't on that list. Writing wasn't on that list. It's seen as a long odds kind of job. So I do like to talk about claiming it early. You don't have to do it as a living in order to have it as a passion. But there's also ways to do it as a living. And I also like to talk about that too. Like, here's how the writers I know are able to make it work. And I think if we talk about those things, if we encourage each other to kind of embrace the things that we love and to make the work that we're meant to make, we're going to keep more people ignited by those ideas. And if you believe, as I do, that storytelling has the power to transform lives and communities, you have to be in favor of that idea. So I hadn't thought about writing a memoir or a book length type of thing on that topic, but I wouldn't turn it down. It's definitely something that I feel passionately about. You speak of mentoring and community in the process of becoming. How important is it to surround yourself early in a community of writers or people who support and validate your desire to write? I kind of have a mixed response to that, honestly. I think it can be very, very important. I think it can be very helpful and supportive and encouraging. I think the ideas that you can get in a community can be groundbreaking for you. In my own experience in the Twin Cities writing community, getting to work with people like Juliet later, getting to meet and become friends with writers who I admire and getting access to their work and their approaches and their ideas. That was my MFA. Wouldn't trade it. Really wouldn't. At the same time, I've along the way been part of writing groups that weren't necessarily all that helpful. People who are approaching it in a different way or with a different level of interest, and that's all good. It's all okay. Within the broader community, there is a community that works well for you, and finding that community, I think, is an essential part of benefiting from the way the community can be helpful. And I don't want to make it transactional. I'm just because you're going to be giving and sharing as much in that space as you are receiving. But things started to happen to me when I found a group of people to write with, when I could see their growth and progress, when I could benefit from their ideas, when we could read the same things together and talk about them, when their perspectives and insights allowed me to see things that I would have missed on my own. When, quite frankly, there were times that I didn't have anything but scrambled something together because that's what we said we were going to do. that accountability, that's kind of an important part of it as well. So if you have a great community, I think it can be really, really helpful. I can't make an argument for delay. I think as soon as you decide that it's something that you want to be intentional about, it's worth finding friends who are intentional about it too, and building something together, and growing and developing ideas together. But you know, it doesn't always work out in that particular way. Okay, anonymous attendee. The poems of yours that I've read remind me of W.E.B. Du Bois's quote, "I am one who tells the truth and exposes evil and seeks with beauty and for beauty to set the world right." Oh, thank you for saying that. Evocative with the ideas of social justice, but also several poems that don't focus on that ideal and focus on the more mundane. I wanted to know if you ever feel a tension in the call of poetry to set the world right and write that mundanity. Do you ever feel like those non-social justice poems are to an extent lesser than your others? And if not, then what advice would you give to a poet that feels their art has something to say? So first of all, thank you. That really means a lot to me. And I really am trying to, in many of the poems I write, see the world clearly and candidly. To present what I see and how I feel with candor and authenticity, and to share that with the hope that in doing so, I'll allow some conversations that I'm not setting out in that work to try to change the world, but well, maybe encourage conversation. And I do think that I have an orientation towards socially responsible poetics and toward writing about injustice and community and liberation. And it's difficult for me to imagine that won't always be something that I'm interested in. And also snow and flowers and my dogs and what I see when I look out my window, butterflies and passerines and things like that. I would say that I write toward captivation. I write toward the things that I'm captivated by, and that can take any number of forms. And what I'm captivated by today may change. I definitely want to have conversations about how I feel in this country. That's central to my work right now. The pieces that I'm writing right now are a lot about men and masculinity and fatherhood. And I really want to have conversations about how we can be different as men, how we can define what masculine means in more expansive ways, in ways that incorporate things like tenderness and vulnerability and a full emotional range and clothes in bright colors, just whatever we can possibly imagine. I want to have a conversation about ending the violence that men are responsible for. I'm captivated by that right now, but I also walk around and sometimes I just see something that's kind of amazing. I'll give you an example. Earlier this year, or maybe it was last year, I don't even know. Time has lost some of its linear charms during this pandemic, but I was walking in the park, and it had to be last year because we were still sheltering in place and there was no one around. And I was walking along this asphalt path, and there were all these lavender petals on the ground. And a robin was about 2 feet away from me, and we were walking together. I was on the path, the robin was in the grass. And I got home and I sent a text to my wife, who's a horticulturist, and I said, "Hey, what kind of tree drops lavender petals?" And she said, "Crabapple." I knew I was going to write about that. There's no question I'm going to write about that. I'm captivated by it. I've never had a robin walk next to me before. So it's yes, I write toward captivation. I tend to be captivated by conversations about liberation and equality and injustice. And I tend to be captivated by using some portion of my imagination to, in aspirational ways, contemplating a different world and what that might be like. But also, yeah, like sometimes a robin walks next to you. And get to the other. Okay. Does the program work with juvenile prisoners? No. There's a juvenile correctional facility in Red Wing. We've tried to work with them. If you are a juvenile in a correctional facility, your educational programming is almost completely geared toward GED. And facility time and space and resources are devoted toward that. And so they haven't really wanted to bring in volunteer programs that are pointed toward education. How many times do you revise a poem until it feels right to you? Do you have a particular muse or ethos that helps you find the words and ideas for your poems? Do you seek out a specific idea or concept that you want to write about, or do you just kind of vibe it and let the words come as they go? Oh, all right. So how many times can you revise a poem until it feels right to you? 7? No, in my book, In Worldly Things, I have 2 poems that kind of come to mind when I think about revision. The first is the second poem in the book. It's called The Source of My Confidence. I'm going to guess it took me 15 minutes to write that poem. And then if I revised it, it was on the level of line breaks. I kind of just left it alone, and it be like that sometimes. I have another poem in the book called Seismic Activities, which is a poem that's working in a contrapuntal form, which is technically kind of complicated and difficult to manage. And it's a long contrapuntal, which was such a good idea when it first came and such a bad idea when I was working on it. And I have 47 versions of that poem in my saved folder for that year. 47. So the number varies. Here's how I think about it. I don't think I can say done. I love that you say that. I love that you say right instead. I don't say done. I tend to say ready. Like I've pushed it kind of as far as I can, and it's time to send it out. My process includes feedback. Most of the time, I want to share it with other poets and get their ideas and take what I can use and reject the rest. But that's kind of it. Do I have a particular muse or ethos that helps me find the words and ideas for your poems? No. Here's what I'd say about that. So for me, I talked about captivation. So I kind of begin in captivation. Like, this is something I'm fascinated by and I want to write about. At some point, typically in editing, but also probably in drafting, I start to think about poetics. Are there opportunities in sound? Are there opportunities in meter? Is the poem, should it be a rondo or a sestina? How should I arrange the stanzas or the poem on the page? That starts to get kind of technical and work of the mind. I think I start first in emotion and get to those types of things later. I'm going to give you my perspective. I know other poets will see it differently. We think about poetry like this vast universe of people who work in narrative modes like me, and people who are lyrical and tend toward abstraction and are highly imagistic. There's visual poetics and sound poetics and all these really kind of amazing and wonderful things that are formalists that are happening in poetry. And for me, I tend to think of sound as bright paint. And so for me, either the entire thing is crafted of bright paint, so that bright paint is the point, or I'm applying it sparingly. I really want to promote the idea and de-emphasize the poet And in some ways, the form and the technique. I'm always kind of hoping that I'll write things that won't be overwhelmed by form. I don't want, if I'm writing a poem about institutional violence, I really don't want someone to leave that poem and say, oh my God, that poem is so amazing. I want people to leave the poem and say, we've got to end institutional violence. Now behind all that, of course, there's a lot of thoughtfulness and intention and care and decision making, and the poem has to work in some ways for people who might seek to promote it, and it's hard not to think about those things also. But I really try to stay close to emotion, to be very thoughtful about the technical things that come in. I like for those to come in a little bit later, although sometimes they appear in drafting as well. I often don't seek out a specific idea or concept to write about. I really admire poets who, especially in books, work on the level of project. My first book, most of the poems written in there, I wasn't thinking about a book at all. I was thinking about poems. And then later I started to put them together and wonder if they might be in conversation with each other in some way, and arrange them toward a manuscript. And that took some time. I haven't formally started thinking about a second book, but I am just writing poems. And I do imagine that at some point next year or the year after, I'll look at what I've written and see how they're in conversation with each other. I kind of prefer that approach right now. I do think it's possible that I'll be captivated by a particular subject in a way that makes me think I want to spend a whole book on this, but it just hasn't happened yet. So put me down in the I just kind of vibe it and let the words come as they go category. What's my best advice for doing writing? It's a living. All right. So most of the writers I know do one of basically four things to make a living. One is teach. That's a popular way to do it. A challenging way to do it, but a popular way to do it. The other is some other job. So I know Rosie's a bartender. I, for many years, did law type work here and there, and worked at corporations doing, whatever. And now I'd make a good portion of my income from freelance writing. The third category I would say is revenue from your projects, and that comes in direct and in indirect form. So you send a poem out, or you write an essay or a short story, and that allows you to maybe get in contact with an agent, or get invited to submit to an anthology, or start working toward a book. The book allows you to appear at universities and have conversations with students there. And then you have this, so your own projects are creating opportunities that lead to revenue, and they're also creating revenue in the form of royalties and things like that. Poetry royalties tend to be modest. It's not always the case, but often the case. And then, of course, the last category is that a lot of writers and artists think about grants and other opportunities, kind of fellowships along those lines, paid things that allow you to do your work. I tend to think about it in this particular way. I see it as I'm trying to buy myself time to make work. Like, most of what I'm trying to do is figure out how I can earn enough that I have enough time to do more writing. And there's this real balance there. I mean, there's going to be some point in time I want to be real about the world we live in. Someone in the chat has a student loan. It's guessing. So we got to work. We got to work full time. We've got to get ourselves insurance if we can. We got to keep our loans paid off. We got a lot structurally in America that's trying to make it very difficult for you to be a writer or an artist. And I know many people had to do this other stuff first. I gotta take care of these bills. I got to get myself kind of set up and continue to write while I do that. And then hopefully get to the point where I can gradually kind of spend more time writing and less time doing other stuff. And that's how it was for me. It was just a gradual shift. Over the years, a little bit less time working, a little bit more time for my own projects. And my goal is to just spend my time on my own projects. I figure I'm 15 or so years away, but that's the thing. There's all these kind of pathways for income. And many of them are kind of connected to the work that we're doing. I would put teaching in that category. I teach a little. I'm a freelance writer and I work on projects for magazines and things like that. I have revenue from my own projects, direct and indirect. And I, heading into next year, think about grant possibilities and fellowships. And, you know, my plan, for example, is to apply for the McKnight. If I get that, something's got to go. I'm either going to do less freelance writing or less teaching because I want to use that grant for more time to write. And if things go well and if I'm productive, hate to think about it in those terms, but if the year ends with something else that can go out there, maybe that leads to additional income, additional opportunities, and less time obligated to work for others. But it's try to craft a plan early. Consider all the diverse ways that you can earn income as a writer. Stay as connected to writing as you can, but be aware that in some ways that can sap your strength and your energy and your time and your desire. I know some people have a hard time writing while they're teaching, like you're grading other people's things and focused on their work and lesson planning. And it can be hard in the margins of your day to find time for your own projects, but try to find work that allows you at least a little bit of time to make the kind of art you want to make. And then gradually over time, try to do more of the work you want and less of the work for others, and be aware that that process can take a while. You like poetry that shows how a white person hates racism. I considered writing one, but I don't want to come off as insensitive. All right. So I'm gonna come at it in a slightly different way. I like poetry that's effective in whatever conversation it's happening. I suppose there's a point at which the conversation is so far away from what I'm interested in that I can't, like, even if the line breaks are like super amazing and its assonance is rich and its images are inventive and thoughtful, I still can't imagine that I would respond to the poem well overall because of its topic. I do think that there is a need to speak candidly and truthfully about racism, about how it makes us feel, about what forces we feel are behind it. And I think that there are ways to write a poem, for example, on how a white person hates racism in a way that can be really effective. And if there's care, then it's going to be successful. Here's another thought that I want to share, keeping my eye on the clock. By my way of thinking, 90% of the work of the writer is done off the page. It's the thinking and interrogating and rethinking and reconsidering. It's the reading and research and preparation that puts you in a position to have even a complicated or difficult conversation well. It's the sharing work for critical feedback from others. It's listening to what they have to share, incorporating those ideas and making it the best you can. And I think within that kind of an approach, we're able to have conversations that are difficult in any number of ways. So I would not discourage you from approaching that topic because of the topic, but I would encourage you in your approach to be thoughtful and diligent and attentive to how you're framing that within the work. I've been given a kind note that we're meant to taper. I'm terrible about the clock. I have to tell you one super funny story. So years ago, I worked for Senator Harry Reid of Nevada when he was at the time the junior senator from Nevada. I actually got to his office before he did. He was that new. And my first job was building file cabinets. And one of my jobs as his intern is if he was at an event, I was supposed to walk up to him and I was supposed to like do in a showy way, go, oh my God. We're waiting for us on, and even if it wasn't true, like just we're gonna be late for that other thing. We have to go. And then he's like, oh shoot, I want to stay, but I'm my guy is telling me I have to go. So without someone sending me a kind note, I would just keep talking until well.
Well, we would love to have you keep talking.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real honor.
It's been great to have you.
We gotta go.
Thank you everybody for coming. And I will have a recording of this up if you want to see it later.
Bye.
Bye.